Take me to work. Alright, so let's finish this story up. So, we got through the recession. We got involved in the storm stuff. Like I said, we were doing a home show at a local hotel. And really pushing the retail, high-end stuff, nice stuff. And we get hit with a hailstorm that was just out of control. And I just happened to be a little bit ahead of the curve and put some ads on Facebook, and we just got a response that was just ridiculous. It was hundreds of inspections from people that wanted an inspection to their house because they didn't know where to turn. One rep running crazy, talked my retail guy into running some leads, and the rest is history. We just went, from 2012 to probably we peaked in 2018. I think it was 2018 when we really peaked, because we had a number of storms every year right in our backyard, and we just kept adding people onto the team. And at one point I think we had 8 sales reps, and just we're just doing really well. And then and what happens with companies like ours is like, my biggest mistake was I was running a small business ran by a small family. And so a lot of times the sales reps were, they were independent contractors, so they could sell or do however they wanted to do. And there was no good systems that we were running because everyone was kind of doing their own thing the way they wanted to do it. And it kind of got to the point where it could have grown, I guess, but it would have to be like we would have to grow in other areas. We actually did try to travel. We went down to central Illinois for a storm, and rented an Airbnb and set up a couple guys to go down there, and it never really panned out down there. So a couple things happened. One of the sales reps that we had ended up leaving. He was just a rotten person, and finally decided he was going to move on and do something else, supposedly, but whole other story. Anyways, he left, and it started snowballing into this kind of like a lot of, I think we just peaked out to how the company was structured and the way things were working, how it was going to work. And it just started declining from there. Then 2020 hit, and we had the COVID hit. And we really didn't know what was going to happen. I mean, we had a pretty robust, overhead with a bunch of support people. We had a bunch of sales reps out there working. I guess more than anything, it was COVID that, kind of we hit the peak, and then we were kind of coming down, but then the COVID hit. And it just, just really... And there was a bad sales manager too that I hired. But anyways, so COVID hit. We didn't know what was going to happen. So my wife and I talked, and I was like, how much money do we have in the bank? How long could we go if no money came in? Like keeping everyone employed, everybody working, that worked in the office and support and production. And it was like 5 months, she said. I'm like, okay, well, no matter what happens, we'll run this thing into the ground. We'll help people out as long as we can. Because honestly, I didn't know what was going to happen. I had read a bunch of stuff throughout the years about the Spanish flu and what that had done and how many people it killed. And I was like, I don't know what's going to happen here. When that whole thing started, I was watching it like from afar, unfolding in China, and watching these videos of people dropping dead in the streets, and they're sterilizing their streets with hydrogen peroxide and alcohol, and I'm just like, I don't know what's gonna happen. And then we had traveled to Mexico it was February, end of February 2020, and we went to Mexico. But right before we left, I had gotten really sick. I mean, I never really get that sick. I mean, I was like, I've got an iron constitution and I've got a great immune system. And so we were flying out like at 5 in the morning, and the limo was coming to get us to fly to Mexico for a company trip. And all of a sudden I started getting a fever and I felt sick, and I went to bed, and I woke up in the middle of the night and I was just drenched in sweat and just a fever and just nauseous, felt like I was gonna throw up, like I never throw up. And all night I fought it, and then got time to get up, and I'm like, I don't think I can do this. And then we had to cancel. We canceled our trip. Everybody else ended up going, but we canceled out for so I can feel better. So it was literally 2 days of me just in bed, sweating, sleeping, sick, and that just wasn't like me. And I don't know, because I eventually did get COVID, so I don't really think that was COVID. That was something else, but it was bad. And so when COVID hit, I was like, oh my God, my immune system isn't what I thought it was. What if I get this thing, and what's going to happen? And you're hearing all the horror stories about ventilators and all this stuff, and you're just like, I mean, I didn't know what was going to happen. I went into total defense mode. I made some bad financial decisions at the time, to be honest with you. Which I could go over those some other time, but this is a company story. But the main thing is that we made a decision we were going to support the people no matter what happened to the company. Well, it ended up they made roofing and construction an essential business, so we continued on. It kind of affected our business because, you know, some of our marketing things that we were doing were affected because people wanted to be at a distance and stuff. But we kept trudging along, and more than, you know, that hurt our business, you know, the adjustment. But more than that, it was bad personnel. I had hired a sales manager, and the thing is, so the COVID hit, and I was like, I'm going to sorry about that. I'm basically, you know, I turned 50 during COVID, and I always had planned on doing a big trip to an island somewhere and spending 2 weeks and just relaxing, and turned 50 years old. Well, I couldn't really do that because of everything that was going on. But I went into kind of a semi-retirement mode where I'm like, I'll just be a figurehead, and if you have questions. And I left basically my wife there and the sales manager, and they kept telling me over and over again, oh, just trust the process. And it was like, you know, I had my suspicions and I kept questioning them, but I was like, okay, I trust my wife, you know. And it just, the sales numbers just kept going down, lower and lower. I mean, in the whole time the guy was a sales manager, it was like 1.5 years, almost 2 years. Didn't hire one salesperson that stuck, that stayed around. Hired a few, but none of them ever stayed on longer than a couple of months. And it was like, I didn't really understand what was going on. And then he also, changed our CRM to this expensive, super expensive roofing CRM. He wanted to buy these pads for everybody, so we got involved in that. It was just all these extra expenses that were coming out, and no no extra revenue, and actually revenue was going down. So during the 2 years that he was the sales manager, our sales were cut in half, and our overhead didn't change. We had the same amount of people working, and it just really hurt. So we hit rock bottom. There's some other expenses that were going on that were uncontrolled, but we hit rock bottom probably in 2025 wasn't that great either, to be honest with you. So right in that time was when we were just lowest revenue, expenses were out the roof, everything. I mean, we had all this overhead and everything. And so last fall, and when we first started, we would go, because we're seasonal, right? And so we'd get to like November, and we would lay everybody off until like March or April. And, you know, during that time we'd lose people, and it was really a pain in the butt. So once we started getting a little more revenue, a little more profitable, we put in place where, okay, we're gonna carry people, even though they won't be doing that much, we'll at least have them work and try to get ready for the next year and keep them on the payroll, because, you know, that'll, sorry about this, I was speeding and passed a cop. Keep them on the payroll so we don't lose the people, and then we keep things rolling. And from like 2015 up until 2023, 24, probably the winter of 23 into 24, we had kept everybody working. And then it just was too much with the overhead and the lost revenue and everything. So in 2024 to 2025, we laid everybody off. But it was a short period, so it was like December until maybe February that we did that. And then, you know, the overhead was too much for the revenue. We were losing a ton of money. So then this last fall of 2025, and it was early too, it was beginning in November, maybe October, we're like, we need to unfortunately lay everybody off. And that's what we did. It was tough because they're people that are our friends and have been with us for a long time, and we really didn't know what we were gonna do. So the thing is like, I had come back into the business maybe the last couple years and tried to, after we got rid of that sales manager, but I was really only half-hearted. And then my wife was only really a quarter heart into the business, because everything was, how are we going to get out of here? How are we going to get out of this? And I sat her down and I said, listen, this is what we do. This is what we have. We've worked on this thing for years. We need to commit. And that's one of the most important things about success, is committing. And we committed to making this business better. And then we sat down with our family, who I'm going to call the team, because our family is the team. And we said, we're going to commit to this business. And, you know, my son stepped up in sales, our daughter stepped up in production, you know. And the thing is we were like, we have these service guys who are son-in-law and son-in-law's friend, and we're like, we want to keep them busy, so we did some things to try to just keep them busy for the winter. We didn't care if we even made money. It was just to keep them going, because they're a young couple, they just bought a house and everything. So we did some things. But what was interesting is, so we started doing these things. They weren't profitable, they were keeping them busy, but then other things started popping up, other things that were more profitable. And then one of them is not even doing the service now. He's project managing some of these jobs that we're doing. So we kind of went and we decided to change our whole focus. We're going away from the storm stuff again, back to our origins in retail, back to basically that plan we had in 2012 where we're going to really position ourselves as the premium company. We're getting away from roofing. You know, we're still going to do roofing and maybe more try to focus on more specialty roofing, higher end type specialty roofs. But really focus on windows and siding. Two things that make a dramatic difference on a house, for one, but for two, there's not as much competition and we're really good at it. So that's what we've kind of started to do. And like I talk about doing the projects on Claude and redoing our website, that's all with this in mind, where we're readjusting things to position ourselves as the siding windows company who also does roofing and gutters. And my next thing to work on is basically positioning ourselves as the full transformation company, because you know, there's a lot of roofers that'll do roofs. They might do gutters or sub out gutters to people. They might dabble in siding. Most of them won't touch windows because it's kind of an interesting. It's really hard to get good at windows, but we've gotten better over the years, so we're decent. And I'm not saying like better, I'm saying less mistakes, because there's a lot of hands that go into doing a window project, and there's a lot of places that there can be errors or mistakes that cost money, a lot of money. So if you start to eliminate those errors, it can be a good business, a good product to sell. But so so we're repositioning, redoing the website. I think we're going to even rebrand the name of the company. We're kind of like an overall company, which reminds me, I didn't even go into some of the stuff we did in the early days. We had, we were Gutter Shutter of Chicago when we started. And then we got into the storm stuff, and then we started doing roofing and siding and everything else. And just the name Gutter Shutter just didn't make a whole lot of sense. Plus it was a dealership situation. So we rebranded. Well, initially I had thought, well, let's just do a bunch of companies and they each do something different. So we had Gutter Shutter of Chicago. We had what the heck was the other Da Vinci Home Masterpieces, it was called. It was like we were doing room additions and some decks. We had Eye of the Storm Restoration, which was kind of our storm company that was dealing with insurance stuff. And it was just too much. It was like, it didn't take long before we realized that, hey, this is just too much. So what we did was we ended up putting everything under one name, and I came up with the name Innovative Home Services. But service that wasn't available, so it became Innovative Home Concepts, and that's where we're at today. But now I'm thinking about swinging and changing the name to Innovative Windows and Siding, just to focus more on what we really want to focus on. We'll still do the siding, still do the gutters, still do all the other stuff, but just putting it under a brand where people can recognize, oh, they do windows and siding. So that's because that's what we want. So that's where we're at. That's the company story. We've got everybody focused. Everybody's kicking on all cylinders. We've got monthly goals. We've got contests. We're working on getting reviews. I mean, everybody is in it. My biggest thing is I need to stay focused and I need to stay consistent, because I have a tendency to, you know, float around and go on to the next thing. So my challenge is to keep focused and to keep everybody else focused. But So far, so good. It's been a good start to the year 2026. And, obviously you guys will be along for the ride on these rides. And we'll see where it goes. All right? So I will see you again tomorrow.